Welcome to another chapter of In the Keep podcast. I'm your very own prophet of the drowned god, the Motherlode. The Keep is a collective of gaming enthusiasts compelled by the drowned god Cathala to frag and jib one another into oblivion for all eternity. So this is a very special episode. We are here on episode 64 of In the Keep podcast, which means it is now time to celebrate the amazing first-person shooters from the N64 console. And we've been baking this idea for a long time. What should we do? And Immorpher brought up the wonderful idea of that's when I should come on, because we'll just talk about Doom 64 the whole time. So yeah, Immorpher was the perfect guest for this, and I'm really proud to present this whole thing to you. But I will warn you ahead of time. If you're one of those folks who enjoys those illicit substances, whether legal or not, in your home state, that enhance or alter your mental state, this is an episode that either you're going to want to go all the way in with that stuff, or maybe just tone it back a bit, because we're going to talk about some really deep, borderline psychedelic shit, just in terms of the themes of what Immorpher does. Now, it is important to state, for those who don't already know this, Immorpher is an amazing musician. He's featured on the podcast all the time. His music is, and it's this incredible dark ambient biomechanical sound. He's been in many different amazing Quake mods and just featured all over the place. Fantastic stuff. But it is very dark stuff. Immorpher, when he's not being Immorpher, is a biomechanics researcher, and he works currently at the Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee, studying nuclear magnetic resonance. Nuclear magnetic resonance. And that really informs a lot of what he does. And we're going to talk about, transhumanism, and we're going to talk about pro wrestling and everything. His music, if you like Aubrey Hodges, or if you like the Doom 64 soundtrack, the Quake soundtrack, any of that kind of shit, you're going to love his music. But I will be honest with you and say this is an extremely tangential episode. We're going to cover a whole lot of topics, and I think that's great. But you're definitely going to get plenty of video game talk here. We're talking about Turok, we're talking about Doom 64, Quake 64, Duke Nukem 64, Perfect Dark, all the classics. So kick back, relax, maybe don't relax too much, or do, I don't care, it's up to you. You choose your own ride, enter at your own risk. Keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times, and enjoy this wonderful conversation between myself and a good friend. Buckle up, you're about to be in the keep with Immorpher.
I go online as Immorpher. I make dark ambient music. I'm getting into making mods for Doom, so my music is used in Quake. I started this journey long time ago. My first gaming system was an NES, but things didn't start to heat up until I got the Nintendo 64. And when the Nintendo 64 came out, I eventually got it for my birthday. And around that time, games like GoldenEye, Doom 64, and Turok came out. And that was my first exposure to first-person shooters. And then I really became addicted then.
This is excellent segue into the theme of our show today, because we specifically have waited. Like, how many months has it been since I was like, you should be on the show?
Yeah, I remember when you asked me, and I was in there trying to fix up some midis, and I'm like, well, if my MIDI project's not done by then, we'll do it by episode 64.
Because we have to celebrate the amazing slew of first-person shooter games that were released on that console, Doom 64, probably the most premier of them for this conversation anyway. But GoldenEye, you already said Turok, and we're in a special time now when all of these games are being made available for PC and other consoles too.
Yeah, and so back then, I came from a poor neighborhood. None of us could afford $1,000 computer. We couldn't justify it to our parents. So what we ended up with is consoles, and the first 3D ones that came out, like the PlayStation and Saturn and the N64, introduced a lot of us to the first-person shooter genre.
Thinking back, I definitely played GoldenEye like before anything else significant. I don't really count it. People ask like, what was your first, arena shooter kind of thing? Like, I don't know if I really count that, but thinking back, like that's probably where it started. Like I definitely already had it in my mind because of fucking Odd Job.
And that hat, ban the hat.
Blasting me in the nuts every time. Because my cousin, Alex, if you're ever going to listen to this show, you piece of shit, would always play his Odd Job. And I was like too young to understand what was going on.
Yeah, for those who don't know, so in GoldenEye, it was a N64 first-person shooter, and it was 4-player multiplayer, and you could be Oddjob. And from the Bond movies, he was this really short guy, and so his hitbox was so small, and basically people would ban him because of cheating. What I would do is there was a level called the Archives, and you could shoot the boxes and they'll explode. But their object would still be there. They just wouldn't have a hitbox anymore. So we would play with our radar turned off, and you could go in those boxes and duck as Oddjob, and people couldn't see you. And if you're just by a corner, you could see them, and you could shoot people from these exploded boxes, and they wouldn't know where it was coming from. Pretty annoying, but I was an annoying teenager.
It is definitely not the best game looking back, but at the time, I mean, it was such an advancement, and it was the first time a lot of people, including myself, saw anything like that.
Yeah, well, the animations were motion captured. They would have people act out the animation, and for explosions, they tied someone to a rope, and they pulled that rope without telling them. So it was a true, genuine surprise, and they pulled them over, and that would be the explosion animation. So that seeing that fluid animation was pretty amazing for its time.
And then Perfect Dark utilized all the same stuff and arguably went, way better.
Yeah. It just came out so late. A lot of people were already thinking of the next generation, and Perfect Dark got looked over. But one thing that I kind of miss from GoldenEye and Perfect Dark is how it would handle the missions. So you'd have these levels, and then you would have to go across different parts of the level to find a document to destroy the security cameras. Then you could make your exit, and depending on what difficulty level you choose, the more missions you would have. And I kind of missed that in a lot of games. That eventually might make a comeback.
It was almost sad to kind of like lose the N64 era, but as you said, when people moved on console wise, we also got a bunch of really cool stuff on the PS1, and then like Metroid Prime, I think was GameCube. So
Metroid Prime was GameCube, and I think so. From what I remember, that was Retro Studios, and a lot of the people that worked on Turok went to Retro Studios to work on Metroid Prime.
You read Retro Gamer magazine ever?
Sometimes
great magazine. Like if anybody out there, if you're interested in like the history, it's because we're not going to talk about the same kind of shit we talk about on this show that in that magazine necessarily. It's much more like that Atari ZX Spectrum. These guys are nerds, like old nerds, but just to get the history of how video gaming like really came to be what it is now is paramount. I think if you're like a true super nerd fan like I am. Shout out to those guys though, great magazine. But they do a lot of stuff on kind of how those teams evolved over time. So like the team that worked on 007 GoldenEye, and then how they worked on Perfect Dark, and like where are they now, and they do all this really good write-ups of that.
Yeah, they ended up working on Time Splitters, and if you play Time Splitters, you're like, wait a second, you could tell even though it was
Yeah.
the most of Rare was by then was owned by Microsoft as like a second party developer. But then the team that worked on Time Splitters left Rare and made their own company. And you can say, hey, wait a second, the DNA for GoldenEye and Perfect Dark are in there, but they did a different take. The levels are more linear, and it's more of like a adventure through the past.
All those games are like so good looking back, just in terms of what they were accomplishing at the time on the hardware that they had to work with. And that's always the beautiful thing. We don't really deal with it because I'm more, obviously more of a PC guy, but so we can always just like soup up our hot rods and push it to the limit. But with consoles, you have to engineer within the boundaries you're given. N64 was actually an outlier in that you could upgrade it, and it was just kind of commonly known that you could just like buy a little chip that allowed you to have better graphics or, do different things. You could, if you wanted a vibrating controller, you could pop that bad boy in there. It was a groundbreaking console. Like I can't even imagine, if you went from having nothing but a Super Nintendo, like, cause I was a baby when this happened. And then the N64, like the stark difference between what those two consoles were capable of is mind blowing.
Yeah, it was very, very different. Yeah. And you can imagine the Nintendo audience of now is still kind of the same demographic back then, that it was a younger audience. And then when the N64 came out, Doom 64 is planned to be a release title. So all these gory first-person shooters were just within that first few months.
Yeah.
And I think it ruined a whole generation of Nintendo fans, because then I got into all these violent games, and then the GameCube came out with Luigi's Mansion. And eventually it ended up with Metroid Prime. They had Time Splitters on there. It had its own Resident Evil remake on there. But on its release day, I was like, man, where's my shooters? I want to shoot some baddies and see their blood on the ground. And it wasn't there at the first part of the GameCube. So it was very weird thinking back of a Nintendo console that came out with all these violent games, like right off the bat.
Actually, it is really strange because it's like they went through an era after that where they were like, we will not publish anything, with blood or violence of any kind. And as you said, they kept their same demographic. And by that, I don't just mean that, they appeal to young people. Like, obviously they still make a lot of games specifically for children, but my wife is a perfect example. Like, the people that played Nintendo religiously then still play those games now, like all the time. She's got the Switch and she's always buying like I want the newest Luigi's Mansion, and I want the newest Animal Crossing is the big one right now. And all these games have been just expertly crafted to still appeal to those kids, but also to keep those the adults that were kids when they first came out involved in that community. It's really cool. And it's like totally foreign to me.
Yeah. And there was kind of like a split. What happened to the GameCube? The ones that still wanted the first party Nintendo titles, and the ones that really wanted the third party titles that they got surprised with on N64. And the N64, at the time, some of the games, the PC ports got roasted a little bit, but the ports of the shooters like Duke Nukem 3D, which is Duke Nukem 64, Hexen 64, which was just Hexen,
Quake 2,
and then Quake 64, and then Quake 2.
Still,
they were ported. It's Quake 64 is one of the more graphically impressive feats that they got done on the N64, and it's one of the few games where you can use the expansion pack to enhance your graphics, but the gameplay frame rate still remains the same. They balanced it
when
well.
You start off with an engine created by John Carmack, you're in a good shape to like not have things get fucked up later on. Like, whereas if you're trying to build a house on a foundation made of mud or whatever, like it's eventually you'll run into problems. That's what we see all the time, especially in modern games. But yeah, at the time.
Oh yeah. You try to optimize it and you don't even know where to begin looking at.
It's with anything. You're a science guy. We'll talk about that too. I dabble in some sciencey shit, and everybody knows that like the more complicated a system is, the more problems can go wrong. You know, you introduce yourself to Newton's second law of thermodynamics. Like the more complicated your machine is, the more susceptible it is to releasing friction, and you lose more energy in the process. And that's just a fact that will never escape. So the more complicated your game engine is, the more likely you are to run into shit. Unless it's expertly crafted and lubed to perfection, which is what John Carmack does.
Yeah.
He lubes them up real good so you can just slide them right through the gears.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hardest thing about going back to the N64 is getting used to the controls.
Oh yeah, that's God. I wish there were. Obviously, you can do it on PC emulators and shit, but like if you could just customize the controls to your liking, would be paramount. It would be amazing. But
and it depends on the game. Like Doom 64 let you rebind all the buttons. Granted, you had to do it every time you loaded the game, but you could rebind all your buttons. So it depended what game you played. Some games didn't let you. And there's like modern controllers out now, like Hori has a new one, Brawler has a new one for the N64 that make things much nicer, but you're still dealing with one analog stick, and that becomes hard for games that let you look where you have to look up and down, like Quake 64 and Quake 2. And I find actually Quake 2 a little bit one of the harder ones to control the N64 controller.
Well, it's like the basically inverted looking is the big part that really fucks me up, because I'm not used to. It's crazy because I unlearned that, because I definitely, when I was a kid, did that, and it was totally natural and I was good at it. But now as an adult, I go back to it and I'm like, what in the fuck am I doing? Like, why do I have to, it's like you're piloting a spacecraft or an airplane with a joystick.
Yeah, and I've noticed there's a fundamental difference between how Quake 2 handles the joystick and how Quake 64 does. And when you interviewed Hakita a while back, he was talking about momentum in the games and how having just a little bit of momentum to the movement makes it much easier to control a player, at least, or intuitive. Well, for analog sticks, having a little bit of what they call angular momentum, where if you touch the stick a little bit and just hold it for a little while, it doesn't move much. But if you hold it for longer, then it starts turning faster. And if you have that little bit of angular momentum, it helps you aim a little bit better on the analog stick. And Quake 2 didn't really have much of that angular momentum. So when I play it, I'm always overshooting or undershooting. And so I get 3 shots in before I can actually hit the enemy.
Ah, God. I don't even want to like have to go back to it, because now I love the Night Dive port of 64 so much, and also Turok, and I hope they keep doing it. I hope they get more and more properties and just keep doing this, because the ability to just play these games with mouse and keyboard controls is amazing. I love it so much.
Yeah. Now combat wise, Doom 64 is pretty easy with a mouse and keyboard now.
Yeah.
On the N64 is a little bit more a challenge, especially with that original Trident controller.
Well, this was crazy. When I was talking to all the people over at id Software, like I've had Stephen Kick on, and then I also talked to I had Quasar on as well, and
the Night Dive team.
And I was asking him, like, so did you guys like adjust the difficulty at all? And he's like, no, it's exactly the same. Like we didn't even mess with that. And I was like, yeah, it's so much harder on the controller, like unbelievably. But I'd always assumed that they had in some way toned it down a bit to compensate for the fact that you were shooting these monsters with a controller, and they did not at all. They didn't care. It made it one of the most difficult games, like really kind of ever, especially if you're a fucking kid trying to play that. You don't have any concept of how this works. If you're not a Doom kid, because a lot of the people that were getting Doom on N64 had never played the rest of the Doom games, so you have to learn all the patterns and everything, and simultaneously you have this crappy way to shoot. But yeah, it translates perfectly once it's on the PC.
Yeah, because it was based on a PC engine, ported to the PlayStation, then reported to the N64. So it had an interesting life cycle to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Night Dive has been doing a lot of hard work getting these ports back onto PC. And like for Doom 64, it's been 10 years of them working on it. And the guy at Night Dive working on it, Kaiser, what the engine's named after him, the Kex engine, K and Kex is Kaiser.
Yep.
Samuel Villarreal. he's been working on it for over 10 years now, just learning Doom 64. He has his own fan port out there called Doom 64 EX, which was improved upon for the remaster, just to get the game going, because once Midway folded, that source code was lost. So what's in the remaster is what they could reverse engineer out of it. So it's an interesting hybrid, but it's accurate enough to play the original N64 demos. So that's a pretty damn accurate port.
I like to imagine, I hope that as the future continues to unfold and all these, I don't want to like diss on any particular company, but like the companies that do lose their source code like that, that could be something that would be valuable to another group of people, or to preserve the game just in general for the future. I'm hoping that Steven and Sam are like watching stocks in other companies, and they're like, hey, they might crash soon. And they're like, get in contact with them ahead of time. Like, go ahead and start sending that shit over now. We're transferring the money. Our lawyer's on his way. Like,
there's like, it's like you can do a little picture of them in an ambulance, chasing after all these dying companies trying to grab their missing source code.
Yeah.
I mean, they got it for, from what I remember, they got it for Turok 1 and Turok 2. They got the source code.
I want to imagine Steven, he's like in a firefighter suit, and like the building's on fire and everyone's dying. He's kicking the door in and running in and like stealing their hard drives. Sorry, guys.
He's fireman carrying a computer down a ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. And
there's the code.
There's people screaming in the background. Sorry, we got priorities, folks. We'll come back for you after this. You got the little trampoline. They're throwing it out of the window. It's bouncing in.
I think companies are starting to notice, because id and Bethesda, they were approached by Night Dive about Doom 64, and they're saying, yeah, let's have you guys make the official port.
Well, they initially were not interested, and then came around to it. They realized as Doom Eternal was ramping up, that it would be cool, like, to release it kind of as a little incentive. And that's how they decided to do it, because apparently they just at first were like, whatever. Who cares?
Yeah. It might have been Hugo, because Hugo said that Doom 64 was his favorite old school Doom, so maybe he whispered.
And Hugo still plays, like, he plays Doom Eternal on a fucking PlayStation controller, as far as I understand it, which is like, we're not going to go down that road. But
yeah, well, with that, with the challenge of Doom Eternal, trying to play that on a PlayStation controller, I envy his skill.
Yeah, I envy his innocence. It's beautiful.
When I play FPS games, I'm kind of like a daywalker, where I play with mouse look, but I have this FPS pad that was made for the PlayStation, so it has an analog stick on it.
Okay.
So I connect it to my computer, I trick it to thinking it's an Xbox controller. So I play my games with analog movement, but with mouse aim.
I'm so lazy, man. Like, I do not go through the trouble of breaking out emulators and figuring out all that stuff. I just wait for it to come out usually, or I go back and try to like find the original version. I want things to be as simple and easy as humanly possible.
I think it's just growing up with the early computers, because I remember when I first got my computer, one of the first games I got for it was Duke Nukem 3D. I already had it on the Nintendo 64 by then, but I just wanted to see if anyone was making any levels for it with the build editor. And so I got it, and you would have to install it through DOS. You would have to select your sound card. And I was like guessing what my sound card was. And you had to go through all the graphics options and hopefully cross your fingers that it was correct when you run the program, and Duke would run for you and run decently on your computer.
Have you seen it was maybe a week or two ago, but John St. John was like hinting at like something new about Duke, and then all it was like just this forum post about Duke 4D from some people claiming to be an indie studio. I have no research on this.
Yes, someone sent me that Duke 4D video, and to be fair, I don't know who they are, but it could end up being a decent project. But the way the Doom community works, if you're presenting like a project or a community project, you usually have like a beta map to test. You have something already started and people can play it, then they get excited for that. That Duke 4D video, I didn't see one thing that was original.
I have a theory, and I would love for anyone who has any real knowledge about this to come on the show and prove me otherwise. I think this is just a stunt to like try to see if Randy will send them a cease and desist letter. And then like, because there's a lot of these properties where I don't have any insider knowledge about this or anything, but people will do this where they just try to get that cease and desist letter so they know who's sending the cease and desist letter. So then they can like try to talk to them about like, well, how can we get permission? Or they at least know like it can't be done before they, because if they put in all the work to make, you know, a proper Duke 4D game and then had it like, because that happened with Reloaded, right? Like they tried to make it in Unreal and Fred was way into production and then they kind of like had to shut it down eventually. And
that's right. That's when you mentioned that. I was thinking of what Fred Schreiber was saying when they were working on that Duke Nukem. And then it was more, then it came down to like, well, if we release it, we can't make any money off of it, but I got all these people to feed too.
Yeah.
We just have to abandon ship.
Yeah. So I do think that might be part of it, is they're just trying to gauge, they're trying to get their feet in the water just to see if there's any sharks swimming around. And if they get bit, then they'll know. Like just your toe though. You don't want to put your whole leg in there.
Well, so I remember I'm also a big Metroidvania fan. So Super Metroid was my jam on the Super Nintendo. And I remember when another Metroid 2 remake was released, which was a fan project to bring the Game Boy Metroid into more of a modern light. And it was just made by fans. And they've been working on it for years and years and years. And Nintendo could have sent them a cease and desist any time within those 5 or more years. But it wasn't until they released it that they sent a cease and desist. So if these people are working on that project, they might not hear from anything until like they actually put something out.
That's what I'm saying. Like, on one hand, I want to see people do the projects, like because I just want to know that it's out there. But it's such a bummer if you put in all of the work just to have it shut down later on. Like, and I don't understand why. Like, I really don't understand the policy behind this. Like, if they're not making money off of it and it's promoting your content, I feel like you should just let it happen. I mean, id Software has always been that way, which is amazing. It's the greatest gift probably ever given to the gaming world ever. Has just been the openness of id Software's tech. And then you also have situations like with, you know, Nintendo or any of these companies. Like if you start making, a Night Dive totally owns System Shock, like rocking and rolling with System Shock, and they're not trying to shut down QMaster. As long as you're not selling it, I don't care. And I think I've played a little bit like early stages of QMaster's System Shock remake, and it's like a totally different thing. It's not like they're making a remake of the game, you know, with like super modern graphics and everything. And he's very much like preserving the original experience, but with, you know, just some quality of life improvements. And it's really nice.
Yeah. And QMaster and I talk every now and then because he's always looking for sound improvements for his project. And if I come across a sound or a technique, then I contact him and say, hey, this might be down the pipeline to help out with that project. And everyone at Night Dive, they seem more than happy just to let that go, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. I mean, because you have to kind of let the community express themselves creatively. And and you find out then when you release like a new game like Doom 2016, well, you have all of this community already involved, so you already have a player base to start from. Even if the game ends up being totally different, it's like, oh, these people are still talking about Doom because the modding scene is keeping it alive. So when you release a game, it's immediately already going to get a lot of press. So it's and the only reason I think that companies end up cutting down is mostly due to legal law. That is, if you you can't just have a copyright. You also have to show a record of defending a copyright. And I think companies don't know where to put that, where they want to set that balance at. And so some companies just immediately cease and desist. Well, my theory with Nintendo was they're fine letting fans work on things, but once it becomes official, they feel like they legally have to step in. So that's why I think they let the AM2R be in development for 5 years, but they didn't stop it until it was officially released, because that's when the lawyers would say, "Oh, that's where you could show legal precedent that you defended your copyright." Yeah, so some companies will hit you much sooner with a cease and desist because they think they legally have to be there.
Right.
But otherwise, yeah, it can be a vague area of showing that you've defended your copyright in court.
What's interesting about that, because I hadn't really thought about it from the you have to show a record of defending it standpoint, is, so here's an example. I don't want to say who it was or what the game was, just in case it doesn't happen the way I'm going to describe it. But they were considering, opening up a trailer with like a Lovecraft quote, like something straight out of one of his books. And they were like worried, like, is there any legal issue with this? And I'm like, it's public domain, so you can totally just use that. Like that, they're from a different country, so didn't really understand this, I guess. But I was like, no, it's totally public. You could just do it, go right after it. There should be no problem with that. And but they were like, well, what if like Arcane Studios, like they try to say it's similar to their game or some shit like that, or like any of the people who worked on Call of Cthulhu, whatever, any of the many games. But my point was, like, if they're going to try to sue you for using a quote out of one of Lovecraft's books, there should be a whole long list of far more important and more lucrative lawsuits for them to go through before they get to you and your indie game, right?
Yeah, and so I think some places are becoming aware of that, because like this is the weird, like, for the longest time on TV, they couldn't do the happy birthday song because they believed it was under copyright, and technically it was. And then some show did it, and then they got sued. And what happened was whoever the copyright holder was, it was revealed in court it was a ripoff of an earlier song.
Yeah.
And so the copyright holder lost the lawsuit, had to pay their lawyer fees, but then they had to set up a fund for all the other places that they end up suing in the past, or getting donations from, or not donations, but fees from. And so if you want to like do a hard stake on something like Lovecraft, you're doing a risk. It's going to be a risk to you as well if you sue someone.
That's what I'm saying. You're exposing yourself to so much shit. Like there's plenty of people with more money than whoever it is doing the suing that are going to step up and like defend, like, no, everybody should be able to use a Lovecraft. Like, it's been around for 100 years. Like, nobody fucking owns that shit. He published it, and it's amazing that we still have it. Like, he was publishing that stuff in magazines that no one read until after he was dead. So just back off. That's like my whole point of view. I'm going to lose my fucking mind if somebody tries to say they own Lovecraft.
But, yeah.
What are you going to sue id Software? Like, are you kidding me? Like, everything that's going on in the Quake and Doom universe, like all the Lovecraft shit that's been in all these video games all the time, and they're going to come at you? No, that's not going to happen. Or if it does, I'm going to fist fight them.
Yeah, well, there's so much Lovecraft influence in so many different things these days. It really has blossomed. So it's going to be it's too far gone to be reversed now. And let's say if someone did own the copyright, you can do the reverse of what I said before. You can show in the courts that they haven't defended their copyright, so they can't sue you because there's so many other people using it as well.
Yeah.
So you can't just pick out one out of a billion and sue them because you haven't defended your copyright, even if someone had some sort of magical way of copyrighting Lovecraft, which they don't.
Oh, here's a great example. You're wearing your very beautiful old school Undertaker shirt. So, when WWE launched their network, like the WWE Network app, it's like the streaming service for all of their content, right? They went on a crusade of taking all of the WWE related stuff off of YouTube, and not just WWE, but everything Vince McMahon owns, which is basically all of wrestling throughout all of time. not all of it, but like the vast majority of it. So when they did that, like can you imagine the leverage you'd have to be able to do that? Like go to YouTube and be like, we're taking down all the years of content, or we're going to claim it in some way. And it resulted in like, ultimately, obviously they won. They drove a lot of shit to their network, and they're doing pretty well until COVID. And now they kind of look like shit, to be honest with you. AEW all the way. But yeah, like why would you do that much work? I don't understand it. Like you're hurting yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot to try to like just show everyone that you own something. It's like, it's okay. It's not like the other people were making a shitload of money off of. Maybe I wonder how much like ad revenue, if you could even put an ad on that at the time, you're making off like the 10 best moves of Dolph Ziggler or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, since the inception of YouTube, people have always been putting wrestling videos on there.
It's a free advertisement for wrestling, which is another, like, even though it's bigger than, our little thing we're doing here, it's another niche community. And what you want is people talking about it.
Yeah. And any kind of exposure helps. Yeah, I remember that people, one of the earliest things on YouTube, people would put their wrestler entrance themes on there. Yeah, and people just would jam out to that. But then that's a double strike now from the music industry and the WWE.
Yep.
So
it's
he's getting trouble.
Most of that stuff is Jim Johnston. He's a very talented composer. Obviously, he's made some of the worst and best songs ever made. You have everything from Rey Mysterio's dog shit entrance music, or like, the gobbledygooker and shit like that. And then you have that all the way up to like the, Stone Cold Steve Austin's entrance music, Brock Lesnar's entrance music, like it just really cool, like rock stuff. That's what's cool about wrestling entrance music, is that it can be objectively dog shit, but if it works, it works. Shawn Michaels entrance music, where he's singing like, I'm just a six.
Oh yeah, I was like, yeah. Well, so when I started a lot of the music stuff, I first was into MIDI, but then once I went into more digital audio workstations, I started making more higher quality. It was still bad, but it was good enough for wrestling. So my friends and I, we used to backyard wrestle.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. It was the thing back in the day. And sometimes we'd use the bad tracks I would put together. And it was a blast.
Yeah.
It was a blast.
Remind me after this, I'll send you, I have a highlight video that my friend's dad made of us trampoline wrestling in a trailer park in Alabama somewhere.
Yeah, I got videos on YouTube of some of my backyard wrestling. Yeah. And I don't even have I don't even remember the password to those accounts anymore. So there. I can't delete them. They just have to stay there. And every now and then I just search them back up and just look at them and just have a good time. Yeah. Remembering the old days.
Oh, you got it. Like, it's like me, but I have like this long, like blonde mohawk that's like combed over, and I was skinny as fuck at the time. I've got a little wrestling, like the WWE replica belt we were using as a title. We were like crazy though. We were not like, I was taking it really seriously because I did plan to like go into that career field. So I was like having like death matches and shit with my friends. I was breaking Guitar Hero controllers on people's heads. We had shovels. We had trash cans. We were doing dangerous shit, man. There was blood.
Yeah, well, we used to say that ladder matches hurt.
Yeah.
And the worst ladder actually was not the aluminum one. It was the wood ladder because it just didn't have any give.
There's no like reverberation to that smack. Yeah.
And people ask like, why would you do backyard wrestling? And when you're like an angsty teen boy, you have a lot of energy to get out. And just going out there, throwing around a 200-pound guy, you just think it's an adrenaline rush. And it really gets a lot of the anxiety you have throughout the day just out of your body.
For me, because it's so, hard to explain to people, but like, because most people are like, oh, wrestling's fake. And I get that. I got you. Okay. But it's theater. Like these are jockey dudes that are trying to circumvent their need to, be like in the Glee Club, essentially. Like I want to be like this character. I want there. It's basically just theater. That's all it really comes down to. But with the added athletic part of it, and there's a lot of pain involved. It really irritates me. People act like, oh, they're not even really getting hurt. I'm like, you are fucking nuts. Like, it is so hard to not die. But the beautiful thing about wrestling, like the most beautiful thing about it, is the fact that you're in there with this guy and you guys are basically killing each other, and you have to trust that person 150%. Like you look into that guy's eyes, you lock up, and they're like, oh, they put their angry face on, like, I'm gonna fucking eat your brains out. What they're really saying is like, how you doing, man? Is your wife okay? Like, and if you're gonna do a stunt, if you're gonna do a fucking pile driver off the top of a ladder through a table, you better trust that guy, because
because you don't want him to drop you on your neck. Because if his legs are not right with that pile driver, you can get your spine compressed, and it's not going to end well.
If you give a guy an aluminum baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire and he's going to hit you with it, you better hope he knows how to hit you with it. That's what ended my wrestling career. Was I got hit in the head with a steel chair by a guy who, I think he might have been on drugs or something, but he hit me with the rim of the chair and not the pad of the chair, and it split me open. And I mean, one of the worst injuries I've ever had in my life, and that really made me kind of wake up and say, you know what, I'm not really making any money at this. I better find something that's going to feed my family. So,
I mean, I have some buddies who now are on the indie scene, and they're doing all right. They're doing all right on the indie scene. But when I was looking at it, I was looking at just the career prospects of being a pro wrestler. And it's rough because it's not always based on your merit.
Yeah.
You have to be noticed by someone, and they have to like you. You can't just become a super success just by skill alone. It requires, like, if you really want to make a lot of money, it requires like someone like Vince McMahon or Triple H to notice you and want you in.
Yeah, it's about networking for sure.
Yeah, and it's only a handful of people, you know. And while in our careers, you know, if you hate your boss, you can find another job. It's something very similar. In wrestling, you don't have many options anymore. And hopefully that changes with things like AEW.
That's the beautiful thing about what AEW is kind of doing right now. Because for when I was in the biz, it was, and when I say that, I'm sure somebody out there is going to be like, who the fuck are you? Like, I was nobody. I'll say that right now. But the best case scenario was you go work for the Fed, you go work for WWE, and the absolute best case scenario is you basically go to not do your art. Like, you work your entire life doing this art form to get to a place that will directly circumvent your creative process.
Yeah, everything's scripted for you already.
And now with AEW, that is definitely changing. Like, there's people like Brody Lee left WWE. They probably took a pay cut, as far as I understand it. Not because, you know, he wasn't making money. It's like, I hate what we're doing here. Like, I've worked for years, like wrestling in backyards and fucking, you know, doing death matches in cornfields and high school gymnasiums and shit, to just get here and have them essentially not let me do my craft and give me these crappy, you know, like segments and characters that I don't want to play. So with AEW, now there's another option. With TNA for a bit there was, but TNA was just WCW all over again I
was surprised how long TNA lasted.
Yeah.
Every time I watched TNA, I was like, it has to be done by next month. It has to be done by next, and then it's still around.
Yeah,
it's still around. They find some way to keep on going.
Impact, yeah, it's not TNA anymore because I guess the oil lords are out of the business now. But Impact, they stream on Twitch like 24/7, 365, and there's some good people over there. I mean, there's good people everywhere. It also comes down to writing and promotion, which with AEW you have like Cody Rhodes. I guess he's just Cody now because Vince owns the name Rhodes.
Oh yeah,
but he's doing a lot of the writing over there, and they have a good crew of people, Arn Anderson and all these guys that are 100% behind like the wrestlers themselves. Like, be a wrestler, do what wrestlers do. But we came here to talk about Doom.
Yeah.
That's okay, man.
No, not our backyard wrestling history.
That's okay. That's what the podcast is about. We can go into little things, and Brand Flakes will provide you with a timestamp on YouTube that you can just skip right past it. Back to you. I kind of want to get a little more background on you, because you're an interesting cat. You're not just the man behind the music. You're also a super genius mad scientist over there too. Where were you?
I just get noticed under the radar. They haven't figured out who I am yet to fire me.
Where are you from originally?
So, I was born in California, and that explains some of my accent. Then I grew up in Michigan for a while. Then I moved to Arizona. and that's when I started my college career. It was in Arizona, and specifically University of Arizona.
Right here in beautiful Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah. And I remember I loved the weather there. These people would say it's too hot, but I didn't mind that. I
Yeah.
didn't mind that. It was a nice experience.
It's
And
it's a beautiful place. Like that's one thing. It's magical. You go outside and you're like surrounded on all sides by mountains, and just
yes,
yeah.
and you get sometimes hear the coyotes at night, and you get to see the saguaro cacti
and the javelinas.
Yeah, and sometimes it's kind of like when you it's like almost like a dreamscape in a way. It has like a supernatural feel, especially right at sunset, right at night.
Yep.
It's just a very surreal place, and everyone should go and visit there sometime.
Yeah.
Even if it's going to see the Grand Canyon, stop by small town Williams. It's a fantastic place, and just hang out, look in the desert, watch the sunset.
Even like Flagstaff, it's not desert at all. It's a very forest, but it's just all of the whole western half of the United States beats the shit out of everywhere but the Appalachian Mountains, as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah, and I was there to study physics at the University of Arizona, and then eventually I went to Indiana and got my PhD, and my specialty is in biophysics, and I specifically study the membranes, the barriers that surround cells, how they respond and react to their environment. And I study them using physical methods to figure out their structure. The technique I'm most familiar with is called nuclear magnetic resonance. And a lot of people might have heard it in its other form in terms of magnetic resonance imaging. But instead of imaging people, I look at the structure of small molecules. So it gets the NMR term as opposed to the MRI term.
Right.
Yeah, so now I'm in Tennessee. I work at the Oak Ridge National Lab, and I've actually been recruited to study COVID-19.
Nice. So
that's
interesting. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so and specifically with COVID, so COVID has two parts that interact with the membrane. One called the spike protein, which allows the virus to attach to the cell surface. And then once it's inside, there's another one called the E protein, which is technically an ion channel. What it does is it changes the chemical composition inside the cell so it can construct itself easier. So we're studying how to disrupt either the S protein or the E protein.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understood all that.
That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing.
So
feel free to ask any detailed questions.
I don't want the show to become like a political fucking argument about COVID or whatever. Like, because people will shit on us if we say anything either way. If we start saying one thing, they're going to be like, you're wrong. And if we say the other thing, they're going to be wrong. But it is awesome to know that someone from our community is actively working on it. Yeah.
And I can understand that it's gotten pretty extreme with the talk on both ends, I can say.
Yeah.
As a scientist viewing from the outside, it started off with a lot of unknowns, and a lot of people were giving suggestions to those unknowns as certainties, and that caused a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I just don't like times when people are scared. When people fear, something, they tend to lean towards safety over their freedom, and it's just unfortunate that when you give away your freedom, you don't get it back later. So it's a scale. Like, I think it just upsets both sides of the spectrum, because obviously you need both. You need to feel safe, and you need to feel like you can still live your life. And we're just in a weird situation, man.
Yeah.
But I'm comfortable knowing that someone who makes the most fucked up music anyone could ever make is over here working on that.
Yeah. And my career in science and physics gave me the programming chops to approach music in a weird way.
Mm-hmm. That's something we'll get into a bit too, because I want to talk about your special keyboard. But do you think that your biophysics background, it kind of informs, because the music is obviously dark and ambient, but like even your album artwork is very Giger, and does the biophysics kind of inform that body horror sound and look for you, or is it just something you've always been
Well,
interested
I
in?
always imagine of the future. So when I approach biology as a scientist, it becomes very mechanical in a way. So
Right.
like Geiger had a very biomechanical type style. And so I always imagine a future where biology is not treated as separate from machine, it's one. And so
Yeah.
when I come up with these art styles, I think of body and machine as one, but also like digital consciousness in a way. And
Hmm.
it's not in the utopian like, oh, I'm thinking like an omniscient being. I'm thinking of like in the future where shit hits the fan and we just have to make something sufficient. So this is just a mechanical organism made to survive, not to be
Right.
fancy, not to be pretty, but just to be aggressive and I
Yeah.
guess abrasive.
As with all things, because we fail to sort of evangelize science and how things will go, as time goes on. Like people tend to think about things in terms of like, how does this affect me now? And then they don't really think about the future. So yeah, we're probably not gonna end up with like these amazing, like System Shock-esque transhumanist sort of like super beings. I'm thinking it's going to become an engineering problem, as it always does, where it's like, oh, okay, well, we're in a really bad situation, so we got to whip up a quick fix. And as you said, to survive, it will be like you're going to need this implant to breathe or something, something along those lines. Not, oh, we've already, gotten way past the problem and everybody's going to live for a million years.
Yeah, and it's always the hardest challenge to predict the future, but you can always imagine a future that there's always going to be some sort of problems to solve, because no matter how you push the knowledge boundary, there's still that boundary of the unknown
Mhm.
that you're still trying to push against. And in the end, there are certain biological, certain just forces in general where you have to survive, and that kind of governs that it's not always advantageous to be a perfect being, because
Yeah.
if you're not sloppy in some ways, it's hard to actually combat against changes in your environment. So you have to have some excess DNA that goes
Yeah.
unused, but you have it there for a certain situation, and that's how a lot of these viruses can survive so long, because they have some of this junk DNA hanging around, and they can randomly insert it in, and we think it's like mutating, but no, it's just going through old forms of its DNA to keep on going through its environment in different forms.
Yeah, it's a kind of a fundamental flaw that people seem to not understand. Is like they think we're evolving towards this one particular perfect being, as you said, and that is not advantageous. Like Hitler would have fucked himself over royally eventually because you need diversity.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, some people have to die so that we know that that trait isn't going to, you know, be good for us in the future. So you have to have like more than one way of living. That way, when the comet hits, right, or when the nukes go off, the nukes are going to go off in cities, and the people who are adapted to living in the wilderness are going to be the ones who survive the nuclear holocaust. So that will be an advantageous trait, and we could get all the way down to like the genetic level with that. But it's just really really interesting kind of concept. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, yeah, and and the thing is, because of how having a little bit of diversity helps, it makes it really hard to predict the future, because you have all
Mhm.
these options to start with and they just fan out. And that's why having these sci-fi too far in the future, it can be, once you actually get there, it's like, hey, wait a second, it doesn't look like this anymore, especially now, and quite honestly, it's hard for scientists to even be any better at predicting the future either.
Well, as time goes on, eventually we will all, evolve closer and closer towards perfect Elvisness, and we'll shed this mortal coil and we will transcend into Graceland. But until then, we got to deal with this survival problem.
Yeah, and I know there's been a lot of talk about like downloading the brain into a computer, but you have to imagine, there's the brain and body, there's all kinds of connections between the neurons through your gut, through your spinal cord, and there's always hormones going back and forth, and once you digitize those neurons, you're really reducing what we call in physics the degrees of freedom of how the neurochemicals pass through your brain, and you're going to change, and it's going to be interesting to find out what that change will be.
All the listeners that are getting stoned and laying down on the couch to listen to this are going to be like, what the fuck have I just got myself into? But you're right. You're 100%. Yeah. As far as I can tell, I don't know shit. I know the weather. I unfortunately know meteorologists who like straight up don't believe in climate change. And I'm like, what in the fuck are you doing in this career field?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's predicting long-term climate is slightly different than daily climate, you know?
Of course. Yeah. But it's just a matter of, I think it really all comes down to people's political views. 99% of the time, it's never empirical when you have that argument, because it's obviously super nuanced subject. Like, I'm not saying that we're the sole cause. I'm just saying like the evidence is pretty clear, but then you have to deal with models, and you know everything about models, I'm sure. Weather models are like some of the most powerful computers that exist, and they're still not even remotely close to perfect. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job, because if the model could just predict it perfectly, then we wouldn't need humans to do it. But you have to have a human there to compare the model to what's happening in real time, and then make adjustments and make decisions, because a model can't really make decisions. It can only make predictions.
Yeah. And what a lot of scientists end up doing is they fork the model. So you have your daily weather model, which is often governed by these supercomputers, and using I know one person actually used to use voxels, but that's not the main one. I forgot what the main one is. But then you have the climate, which ends up being often a separate model over longer time spans of how like the Earth wobbles and tilts more so than the local ocean currents.
Right. You have like a good example is that you have the North American model. It's excellent for North America, but you can't use it in, a different place, because it takes into account some of the, just the climate it observes in North America. Or it's excellent for predicting like supercell tornado producing storms in Oklahoma. But as soon as you introduce the Rocky Mountains to the situation, it is dog shit. Like, it can't handle that, because it's just not taking that into account. And it's really hard to program in. Like, how do you take that into account? So we have algorithms that humans have to like, all right, we got to crunch the numbers here to figure out what the likelihood of this is. There's also the element of like, if you have a lot of ifs, this happens, then, the storm will hit here. And then you have to have a human there to say like, I'm looking at the radar and I know the model said this could happen, but the storm is 100 miles to the north. So it's not possible for that to happen. So, all right. Eventually we'll get back to
it's a deep rabbit hole. It's a deep rabbit hole.
Eventually. Your music is, to me anyway, fucking awesome, dude. I don't think either of us predicted that I would just be like throwing it all over the podcast, but I loved it. As soon as I heard you on Quakecast, I was like, that's my jam. That is the theme of what I'm doing here, is this ethereal, Lovecraftian, dark universe. And it's such an amazing backsetting to everything. One of the comparisons I think Dump Truck said was that, as you said, it's mechanical. So you have like this ability, especially in Quake, it lends itself to that perfect, obviously, of making the environment feel alive. And that is your work. So let's get into your musical influences if you can.
Yeah. So I first started, as I mentioned before, making music with MIDIs. It was because I would listen once I installed Duke Nukem and Doom on my computer. I would go through the music. I was like, oh, look at all these MIDIs, and I was like, oh, I can actually look at their notes. And I had an old GeoCities page I would put MIDIs on. And then eventually I worked to a digital audio workstation where I made various tracks. I don't think any of them are all that great, but like backyard wrestling and whatnot. Then I end up getting out of music for a little while. And I just remember like some of the earlier soundtracks I would look for, like when everyone got the internet back in the 90s, it wasn't Napster back then, but it was something like it. And I remember I was looking for their Doom. And when you look on these online for music at that time, you wouldn't get MIDIs, you would get the MP3s. And a lot of it was like Aubrey Hodges's music. And I would find the Doom PlayStation music. I was like, oh man, that reminds me of Doom 64. I didn't know that Aubrey Hodges did both at the time. And then I would play some Doom 64, and that soundtrack would really stick in my head. And for those who are not familiar with Doom 64, it has, or the Doom PlayStation music, it has I think technically it is ambient, but it has these somewhat abrasive sounds that come in and out, and these weird soundscapes. And that always stuck in my head. And it was just, once I started programming and once I started getting into physics more, I started learning about signal processing, how to process signals coming in. And then I was doing radio frequency signals from nuclear magnetic resonance. And just Aubrey Hodges' soundtrack and whatnot just stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And I moved to a new house, and I was listening to his soundtrack a lot because I would have trouble sleeping at night. I don't know, to sit there listening to it. And eventually I went through it so many times that I was predicting the songs. And once you start predicting ambient songs, then that's a little bit too much. It's too far. And then I was thinking, is there a way I could generate something similar? And I wasn't sure of his exact methods then. I'm a little bit more familiar with them now, but then I decided to do my own way of trying to approach it. And what I was first going to actually do something in MIDI, where I'd have sounds in MIDI, but then I realized that was too limiting for me unless I used custom sounds. So I decided that I would program my own synthesizer, which got me down a rabbit hole. And actually, when I was programming that synthesizer, I was listening to Lovecraft's Dunwich Horror.
So I literally just listened to that like recently, man.
Yeah, so there's certain sounds that my synthesizer produces that just take me back. Because I was sitting there programming, and I realized I could pretty much define a waveform with a series of points. And then I could repeat that, and then I'll have a tone. And that was like a very old school retro way of doing it. But then I realized I could evolve that tone over time. And what I was trying to do was I realized that natural sounds, it's very rare for a sound to sound exactly the same twice. So when a bird is chirping and it chirps again, it's in a slightly different state. Its larynx is slightly drier. Yeah. So it's going to be some alteration. So I was like, if I want to do like ambient sounds, I need to take my inspiration from the environment. And each time I play a sound, I should have it slightly different each time. So I have all these waveform points evolving. And then I also have effects that I put onto it. Like I have a distortion that I put on there, and I have a reverb. And actually, the reverb can also act like a speaker cabinet where it can cut out certain frequencies. So it's kind of like going through like a pipe or something like that. And I can have that evolve. And the way I do it, it's a technique called convolution. And I change how it convolutes over time. And eventually, so I have all these parameters that I'm setting up, and I want them all evolving. And I realized that's too much for me to just evolve on my own. So I have my computer set up like a series of like a matrix of noise vectors, just gradually evolving all these sounds over time. So if you listen to some of my tracks, I have these deep notes, and they kind of fade in, they fade out, and they change slightly over time. And that's what's being generated right there, is all these deep sounds that are evolving.
Yeah.
And then I also have decided, like, okay, if I want to make ambient music, I need to emulate various aspects of nature. And like if you startle a flock of birds or a flock of animals, one will make a noise, and then the rest will make a noise. So a lot of times if you hear me introduce a sound in my music, I'll have it echo back a few times. So like ding, 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 kind of just emulating what I hear in the environment. And that's just trying to make things more organic. So if you're listening to it, you know it's synthesizer stuff, but it doesn't seem wrong in a way that this is total noise and I hate it. And even though some people might listen to it and might get that kind of impression because they're not used to that kind of music, but it's trying to take the chaos that my synthesizer takes with all these noise vectors and get it into like a palatable form.
For me, to describe your music very simply, it sounds like nature. Like it mimics the patterns that we see in nature, and the chaos that we see in nature. But if the world were really fucked up, that's what it really just. It's the best way I know how to put it. Like, and if the world were nuked to shit or completely desolated or whatever, or turned into a biomechanical Giger's future, this is what it would sound like. And I think you pretty much nailed it down.
Yeah, and it ended up being like a style inspired by Aubrey Hodges, but it kind of ended up being like a style that's slightly different. It became my own, and I kind of feel it fits between Doom 64 and Quake 1.
Yeah,
and that's when I approached the Quake community, like, because I started making this music just for myself because I wanted to have something to listen to, like when I'm trying to relax in bed or when I'm working in the lab. It's kind of weird to have such kind of music, but that's the kind of music that gets my mind going. And I approached the Quake community about it, and to my surprise, they really took on to it. I know it was JCR that you had on the podcast before that used the first track, and then he had it in one of his maps. And then
was it the map that's like the giant living house?
Yes.
That is such a great map, and it's so perfect for your music too.
Yes, and I pretty much said, "Hey, here, feel free to take any track you'd like." And he picked one, and it worked. I'm happy it worked. I wasn't sure at first, but it worked. And I ended up working on the Quake Finnish Mappers Jam, or SMEJ, or if you see it, the official title of it is Realm of the Lost.
Yep.
Because they heard down the line that my ancestors from both sides of my family are Finnish, so they're like, okay, we can let him in on this.
Oh, that's fucked up.
Well, I mean, so all the people on there are Finnish.
Yeah, it's cool.
So they're like, oh, well, he has enough Finnishness in him, so we can let him. He can be on board, and we would like to use his music. So then the Realm of the Lost was completely original tracks to that Quake map set, and it's all my tracks, and they're all original to that. And some of those will never see a release outside of that Quake map set. And so I'm usually just hanging around their Discord, translating their Finnish via Google Translate, and making really bad jokes. And for some reason, they don't kick me out. They just let me make horrible humor all the time in English on their Finnish mapping Discord.
I'm a huge fan of Smile Scythe's maps, and both that and Jump Jam. And just in general, he's a really cool guy. But yeah, like the shit that has been turned out of the Quake community is absolutely crazy. And what really kind of blows my mind about it is that most of these guys are really just hobbyists. Like they strictly want this to be, like JCR is a perfect example. Like I just want to be a hobby. Like I'm like, dude, you could be making amazing video games. You could easily be a level designer in a game as good as you are at this. And a lot of those guys could be, but they don't seem interested. They just want to do the Quake thing, which is awesome. That's so good for the, just keeping the community alive. And eventually some people will rise up from that.
Yeah, well, some of them are in the gaming design world, and they're making games. And I know a few of them that are contracted right now to make various games for various companies. And I can't say who because they're under NDAs. But if you're playing these maps, just you're getting some of these professional map designers for free.
Yeah, it's so cool.
And you don't know. I mean, I sometimes hint to people, like I'll watch a Twitch channel of someone playing like one of the Quake map jams, and I'll hint around saying, "Oh, look, this guy will be a big name in the future. This guy is a big name, but I can't tell you who he is," and stuff like that. So it's an amazing community.
It is. It's between that and the Doom community and like everything. Like, there's amazing programmers all over the gaming world, but specifically the Quake and Doom level designing communities have just taken me on a wild trip that I never thought I would go down. Just in their generosity and their creative expression, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it really is.
yeah, and like I think a lot of it is a lot of us old school FPS fans are now adults. We have our careers, and some of us have a decent living, so we just want to give back to the game that helped us get through some rough times. You know, for me, it was I played a lot of Quake 64 and a lot of Doom 64. So any chance I get to help out the Doom or Quake communities, if I have time, I'll jump in and say, take it free. You don't need to give me anything. And if you give me something, I'm just going to refund it back into indie devs or friends.
Would you be interested if someone were like really actually try to contract you to do the soundtrack to a game? Would you be open to that?
I don't know, because it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
I think if they give a good enough pitch, if I see the game as violent and grotesque enough, I'm like, okay, you're talking my speed now. Then maybe, yeah. I mean, the way I work now is I make something because I like it, and then everyone else can use it. That's kind of the way I work now, because I have a pretty decent career right now in science. And so,
yeah,
while things are good for me, because it's not good for everyone, and especially right now, right? I'm in a mood to just give things for free and help out where I can. Like, if let's say if one of my friends is making a game, I'm like, yeah, just use my music, and if your game makes any money, just give me some chump change. Just take it. I don't need to be paid up front. Just give me some chump change, and if I end up, because the future is always unpredictable, if I end up getting in a rough spot, maybe I'll ask for help. But right now, I'm doing good. Just take my stuff. It's there for free. Just grab it.
I want to get you in contact with this young man from Phoenix, Arizona, who's working on. Have you seen Scythe 2? It's a Doom Total Conversion.
Yeah, I think I've seen a little bit of that. Yeah,
it's really good. I've played it. He's an amazing kid. I gotta stop calling him a kid. He's a man now. He's almost 20 years old, but his game is really impressive. And I think he's got a bright little career ahead of him in terms of just being an indie dev and maybe picking up some other stuff along the way. But he was talking to me about I need music for this particular game because, I had to, I ran out of money and then I had to kind of use non-copyrighted music that maybe doesn't fit it perfectly. And he's like, but I want this dark ambient sound because it's a very Lovecraft inspired game and it's got body horror. It's literally right up your alley. And he's just saying this and I started smiling. I was like, I know a guy.
I just take it.
I know a guy.
Take it. And
I'll let him know.
Sell it, and if you end up any change left over, I'll take it and I'll spend it back into the community.
God, he's like these levels where you're walking through the inside. There's one called The Womb in one of his one of the two Scythe games. I forget which one, but you're literally walking through stomach vial, and then you have to the exit door is like a butthole. And then you eventually come out of the person's mouth and kind of get vomited into this ethereal blackness. And then you come out in a different world. This kid he's one of us. He's part of our tribe.
Yeah. It's kind of like imagining the universe as a living being in itself. And you're just going through its bowels and fighting up that. Yeah. Yeah. That kind of stuff. I'm always surprised when I hear, to me, you're young. And then to him, then he's young to you. And I remember when I was your age, the retro thing, I guess an N64 is starting to get retro, but the true retro thing was Atari. And none of us.
By the way, his name's Scumhead. I think I went that whole time without saying his name. I'm sorry. Scumhead.
Scumhead, it's yours. Just take it. And if you need something custom, just send me a message and I'll see if I can wrangle some time and getting things together.
Yeah.
And so back to what I was saying.
Sorry.
When I was about your age, the retro stuff was like the Atari and stuff like that. And none of us were really interested in going back and playing Atari. So it often surprises me when I hear young people find these classic FPS games and these classic games and just fall in love with them. because for a while there, like when Doom 64 was about to get its remaster, I wasn't sure how people would react to it initially, because I know I got some nostalgia for it, so I'm already rating it higher than what the average person would anyway. But it was in a different time where level design aesthetics were different. And then to my surprise, it's 9 out of 10 on Steam. And I'm like, wow, people love it.
The Night Dive port of Doom 64 is my favorite Doom game, period. That's not a mod. Like, that's not a total conversion or a completely new map set. Like, just as from the original, the Doom titles, it is my favorite one, period.
I've talked to other people about it when Doom 64, so it has this weird atmospheric soundtrack, but it has this old classic FPS action of shooting down sprite enemies, and it has this advancement of gradient sector lighting, where if you look up in the walls, the darkness or the color would fade to a different color or different darkness. So it has a lot of these unique features that Doom 64 couldn't have come out at any different time. Talking that if Doom 64 came out later in the N64 lifespan, all the enemies would be 3D, the levels would be simpler, and the frame rate would be like 15 frames per second. And so it just had to come out at the beginning of the N64, if at all, right? Because even back then, a lot of the Western American game reviewers weren't that excited to see another Doom engine game. Even though all of us, a lot of us was the first time playing Doom, and so we loved it because this was our first Doom engine game. And so another Doom engine game coming out later on the N64 lifespan was not going to happen. So it just hit that window. It got in at the right time, and it's such a unique and different take on Doom, but it also keeps a lot of the core gameplay aspects that a lot of old school Doom fans like. So it's this weird merger, and it's been surprisingly received well, because like Doom Eternal fans are not always necessarily old school Doom fans. And so they give it a try, and they're shooting through enemies. They approach their first puzzle, and I'm like, oh no, they're going to hate it now. This is going to confuse them. And yes, it does confuse them. But in a way, I think it's kind of liberating, because they're free to move in the level. They're not being funneled, and they're free to think about solving this situation. It's not just testing their skills. It's testing the way they think. And I think it's a little bit of a fresh approach for a lot of these people. And it's just amazing to see all these young people enjoying it.
It came out about at the perfect time, as you said, because it keeps that core gameplay, that everybody enjoys about Doom 1 and 2, but it has so much more atmosphere, and like is just right on that perfect precipice where like the graphics are suitable to tell the story that you couldn't really get with the first two Doom releases. It just wasn't possible at the time. And as you said, like the people who are playing Doom Eternal and then they get that pre-order package and then they fuck it, I'll try it. A lot of them won't like it. Initially, they're going to be totally jarred by just not having mouse look, and that's part of it. But if they can get past that, the few who do, like that's new people, new members of the Doom community that we all know and love. So I'm for whatever gets them here.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I would start playing, the first Doom source port I played was the Doomsday engine. And that was later used to do an early Doom 64 port. And that I used to play with mouse look. But eventually, over time, it's kind of weird. I don't know why I end up going in this direction, but over time, I disable mouse look. I reduce my resolution to half. I take out all the filtering. I don't even want mip mapping in there. I take that out. So I have this crunchy, pixely mess. And I even try sometimes to reduce the color output. So instead of having 256 colors per shade, I reduce it down to 128 or 64 just to crunch up how the colors go on. And I get this very crunchy look. So I understand, like when you start out, you want maximum graphics. You want all in the bells and whistles. But the older I get, either my brain is degrading and I want more degraded games, or my aesthetic is like, oh no, I want this to be more crunchy. I want to see these hard pixels. I don't really care about the mouse look, because sometimes with that mouse look, the sprites look funky anyway, and takes me out when I see a funky sprite looking just all flat. So I'm like, no, I don't want mouse look anymore, and I disable that. And it's just getting a very crunchy, very gritty, very like my album covers. I will degrade a lot of the colors, or if you go to my YouTube channel and I go on the videos, I will purposely degrade and add noise to it, it gives you like a raw feeling to it, that it's not overly polished. It doesn't like when you see something that's so polished, it reaches that uncanny valley where it looks too beautiful that's almost becomes disgusting, like drinking a bottle of corn syrup. So I'm like, no, I want to make it dirty. I want to make it gritty, and then that kind of gives like an organic and almost like a real feeling of something foreboding.
I don't think you're capable of doing anything half-ass. You go all the way in on everything that you get into.
Well, it's just I obsess over certain things, and if my wife was on, she's like, yeah, I pick a few things that I obsess over, and then if something else comes, I'm like, I don't have time for this. I don't have that many years to live. I don't care. I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm just going to focus on this. And yeah.
We're very much the same in that regard. People they'll come to me like, oh, why don't you do this or that? I'm like, I do not have any extra bandwidth for that. I'm totally 100% in on what I'm doing over here. And it can be challenging to be like a good friend sometimes, because I'm just like, no, I'm so obsessed with what I'm doing. Yeah. I can't take on a new thing.
Yeah, like someone buys me a Steam game and I'm like, it might have been on my wish list, right? But still, it's like, I don't have time to play this until probably the next year.
Yeah.
But and the thing is, like, I realize that the way I've grown up is differently. I had a different kind of cultural experience, and that means that I like certain things, but it doesn't mean other things are bad, which is, I find it rough for game reviewers to score a game, to give is this a 9 out of 10, 7 out of 10? And who is it an 8 out of 10 to? Is it just to you? Is it for a specific audience? Is it for everybody? So when I look at games now, I don't judge them as harshly as I did when I was a teenager. I'm like, yeah, I could see this game being perfect for this type of person, so I'd recommend that game for that person. I'm no longer going to go on a Steam page and I wanted to have this in this game and they didn't give it to me, so this game sucks.
Well, it kind of comes back to the predictive modeling thing. You can have a rubric for how you score a game and, give it a, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, whatever out of 10, or however you want to do it. And it doesn't matter, because it really comes down to, again, the taste of the person. So is the fundamental basic stuff there? Does it work? Will it run on my system? That's kind of everybody's going to be concerned about that. But once you're beyond that point, it really just becomes a matter of taste. So when I talk to Vince and, anybody who does game reviews, I always say, I'm not interested in you telling me your score or whatever of the game. I want to know that I look for people who clearly have similar taste for me, or at least people who I know what they think well enough that I can predict what my reaction will be based on what their reaction is. So when I see someone like him say this game is really good and these are the reasons why, I know that I trust his opinion to be consistent.
Yeah, and when you see a Vince Steele review, he'll go and he'll describe what's going on in the game, some of the mechanics, some things that might surprise you. So you'll learn something more about what's going on in the game, if that will appeal to your taste. He's thinking about it, what audience is this for? Who will this appeal to? Not immediately it's only about me and what I like.
And he's also got a very unique way of expressing his opinions and things like that.
Psychiatrist and
yeah.
So it comes with some ongoing themes to keep you entertained as you go through this journey, and that's what it is.
Yeah,
it's a journey through art. So we're talking about how games fit a niche, and Doom 64 to me fit into a particular niche that was unique to a lot of N64 owners. So it was a small group of people who even realized it existed. And so obviously I can talk about Doom 64 forever. And So that inspired me to make a Doom 64 Discord server, because I could tell people I was talking about Doom 64 on everyone's Twitch channel, on everyone's server. I was like, this needs to be localized. So with the help of Captain Caleb and Wolf McBaird, I made a Doom 64 server where it's a place where we just talk about Doom 64, not specific to any port, but we talk about any kind of port of Doom 64. So the remaster, Doom 64 EX, you talk about like having mouse look, we talk about DZ Doom and Doom 64 Retribution, which have mouse look. And we even talk about Brutal Doom 64, because Brutal Doom 64 did bring the attention of Doom 64 to a different audience. And surprisingly, those people, the Brutal Doom people, like Doom 64 as well. So I was surprised about that as well. And so I have this Discord going, and we have all kinds of mappers on there. We have Eric on there, who is in the process of reverse engineering the Doom 64 ROM. So they made the remaster. They didn't have the source code, and they just had to reverse parts of it that they could. And Eric is finishing the process. So I'm hoping one day that we'll have Doom 64 mods compatible with the N64 itself. So that'll be pretty sweet. And I've been pleasantly surprised of how well the Discord has taken off so far. Because I was seeing that once the remaster came out, a lot of people were talking about it, but then it started to die down again. And I was like, there's some good Doom 64 Discords in terms of specific ports. So Retribution has one, and Kex, the Kex engine has a Discord. Night Dive has a Discord, but there wasn't one specifically for the general. Just talk about Doom 64. Let's help collaborate and keep it going. And I was inspired particularly by the Quake mapping community, because I've seen how Dump Truck had that server going, and it keeps the Quake community kind of running and going.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if my server will ever reach that kind of height, but if I can get 1/10 of what Dump Truck did, I'll be overjoyed. And right now I'm already impressed by how much has gone on there. Like, we've had people working on making MIDIs for Doom 64, so using Aubrey Hodges sounds and making Doom MIDIs. And like the port of choice for modding has been Doom 64 EX, and it's been around for about 10 years. And it was only until like a month ago that on the Discord, through collaboration and a guy named Impboy kind of drove it forward, that we figured out how to import custom music into Doom 64 EX. So 10 years later, now we can put music in it. And so that gives room for more artists. And then we also figured out through like Volosaurus, and then Dexia's really drove it forward, that now on the remaster, we can already figure out how to make maps for it, but now we can add custom textures to it now too. So if anyone wants to jump in and make Doom 64 mods, I got your hookup.
What's really cool about that is, so you're going to get to see everybody kind of discuss the whole thing. I'm kind of curious, how have the loss levels been sort of received by the greater Doom 64 community?
So most people have felt it was kind of like a natural progression from like if Doom modding was continuing for all these years the way that if the Doom 64 modding was continuing like how the Doom modding was going, that's would be the kind of the levels that would have been made. So where in general, like a lot of the Doom modding, there's a lot of splits into like very hard like slaughter maps, or you have these very colorful explorative maps. And so the Doom 64 kind of straddles that middle ground, and so those lost levels were made by Kaiser, who's been in the community forever, and he's been mapping for Doom 64 and Doom projects since then as well. And so they've been generally well received. Now I think they appeal. They're a little bit more appealing to old school Doom maps because they don't have as much puzzles as the Doom 64 ones did.
Right.
But they do have that non-linear kind of exploration where you find a key there and hopefully you remember where that blue door is, because it's likely there's going to be a lot of colored lighting there for it to remind you where to go. And so he kept that alive. And these maps tend to be a little bit harder and a little bit more detailed. So that's what you expect from a mapping community, to have a little bit like one difficulty higher and a little bit more detail.
Yeah. I noticed as I was playing through them that there are some little kind of tricks that I see him playing that would not have existed at the time that Doom 64 originally came out, which is nice. Like because it's supposed to be like, I guess per Bethesda, they wanted to bridge it into the modern, Doom canon. And I thought it was done really well without in any way compromising, what the game was. So it's just really cool how he managed to do that. And then with the final boss fight that you get with, the mother demon, and it's totally different than the original fight. Because, back then it was very common. You and that demon, and you're just going to run around in circles, maybe a few others. But this one, we have massive improvement. We've got like puzzles within that. You have the ability to, because you start off the lost levels with no weapons, and then you have to re-up your stock. So you just pick up the weapons as you move into the area, and then you have to find all the what are they called, demon keys or whatever. Yes, you find all of those within the level itself, and you can choose to just straight up go and engage in the fight, or you can play the game the way it's meant to be done. And I love that. I love having options.
Yeah, having the freedom, because like if people watch my YouTube and see how I play Doom 64, it's very unlike how Doom 1 and Doom 2 players do. Doom 1 and Doom players will run in, circle strafe, and blast and blast and blast. I will look around the corner, shoot back around the corner. I have a very hesitative approach where I kind of take my time in approaching battles. I like to use the geometry to my advantage, which is and get the enemy stuck around the geometry so I can cheese them a little bit and funnel through the corridors. And that's one of the nice things about the open-endedness of a lot of these old school games, is that you have this freedom in approaching battles in different ways.
You watch Decino's channel ever?
Yes.
Anybody who doesn't, go to YouTube and look up Decino, Decino.
I learned how to use the BFG properly from Decino.
He is a master. Like the way that he plays it, because he goes straight to the top difficulty and will walk into a map blind, any map pack. And just hearing him so casually talk about it as he's doing it, blasting. It's such a treat.
And Sunlust is like, wait a second. I would start Sunlust and just die immediately, but he's in there just working his way through like it's a normal map. It's like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense.
The way he's so comfortable with, he knows exactly how many shots it takes to kill an enemy and how their movement patterns are. So he'll just literally walk through a giant horde of enemies as if it's nothing. It's just graceful. It's like watching ballet or something like that, and he just dances around them. He'll lead them to where he wants them to be. I'm not worried about that. I'm kind of worried about these revenants over here. So I'll give them a couple blasts. 1, 2, 3. Okay, he's down, and I'll just slide back over here. Let's get them infighting. Why not? It's just like watching the most masterful thing ever being explained to you. Because it's one thing to be really good. It's another thing to be able to do live commentary of yourself playing.
Yeah.
And not sound frustrated. I'm incapable. I suck at Doom. I'm terrible. But
yeah, there's levels to it. And I've been slowly learning that because I recently was inspired by Decino, and I did his fast monsters, watch me die, pistol starts, no mid-level saves for Doom 64. I didn't 100% kills like he did, but for me, it was a challenge just to get through it. And you set up certain strategies, like if you remember where those Lost Souls and Pain Elementals are, get that chain gun out. Don't even bother with that double shotgun, because between reloads, they're going to bite you to death. And with those chain gunners, just get the chain gun out, because on fast monsters, they'll blast you right away. And there's certain sections where if you don't set up infights, you're going to run out of ammo. And you're not going to fist all these monsters unless you're Decino. He can do it. I can't. So you have to set up some of these infights going on.
Oh yeah, he's like a kung fu master. He's a 9th degree black belt in Doom for sure. And I really love seeing that kind of stuff.
And at the end
it's inspiring.
At the end of Doom 64, I wasn't sure how the final battle would go, because I was doing pistol start. I was not going to use the Unmaker, And and so what I discovered is, like, on Fast Monsters, if I can the enemies there are flagged not to infight, so you can't set up infighting. But I realized if I was circle strafing, I could get them to friendly fire each other, and that would eliminate a lot of them. And
I noticed that too.
yeah, they'll just friendly fire and slowly wear each other down. Then I was calculating how many BFG shots I can do on a mother demon. I think if you're perfect, you can get 2. But if you're, but that's only if you're really perfect. You might be able to get her down in 2, like a cyber demon. But it's to be safe, it's 4. So I was like, okay, I can use 2 or 3 BFG shots, but I need to save it for the mother demon. And just having that strategy in your mind, just having these levels of depth. And I was lucky that I was able to get to that final stage and beat it the first recording, and just get through the mother demon by just getting in her face and BFG blasting her, and not fearing and running to the corner.
Yeah.
So if you look at Decino's playthrough and my playthrough of approaching mother demon, we take it 2 very different ways. And my way was, I learned from watching some speedrunners how they would handle the mother demon and just get in her face and BFG blast her. Well, he does a few BFG blasts and he goes on the outside and rockets it. So even at playing games, at these old school games at very high levels, you get the freedom to choose whether you want a BFG blast or you want a pellet from rockets. And it's a nice way of approaching a game.
I would like to see the mother demon become more like common. As you say, like, hopefully we'll get a lot more of that as the Doom 64 like custom mapping community moves along. But like, I think she's such a great addition to the palette, and it's like I wish that were more common in like the id Software, like modern Bethesda Doom games too. Like, that should be an excellent thing to have in there. Honestly, some of those enemies I just straight up don't like. The angel things, like, get that shit out of here.
Oh yeah, and Eternal, the flying ones, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I know people on both sides on Doom Eternal, because as that debate episode, and as the way they describe it has a specific kind of pattern that you approach it with, and the people that like that pattern understand it. Doom Eternal is the 10 out of 10 for them. But then for the others that have a different type of approach, they have a hard time even getting traction in it,
Yeah, it just doesn't lend itself to playing it your own way, which is fine. Like, it's very Soulsborne action FPS, like Devil May Cry-esque, I guess, where it's that you're just kind of expected to play the game in a certain way. And that's okay. Like, I'm not trying to bring down Doom Eternal or anything. It's just that was not what I want in my gameplay experience.
Yeah. Well, like, what the Doom community tends to agree on is there hasn't been a bad Doom game. There's just been various styles that fit for various types of people.
Oh yeah.
And all these, and it's interesting. Like, people rank, like, all the Doom games are good, but they rank them in different ways. And it's interesting, like Doom 1 and Doom 2 players, pretty much all of them have played some Eternal, but then a lot of these Eternal players are playing Doom 1 and 2. So it kind of like everyone's playing every game in the Doom series and finding out and putting their own hierarchy in it, but everyone's all Doom fans in the end.
People tend to, like, the angrier people tend to get angry. Like, this shouldn't exist. Like, the old games are still there, and anything that makes the Doom brand more popular ultimately means that more people's eyeballs are on it. So even if there are, most people are just going to play, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal and never look back, a portion of those people will, what if it's 1%, 1% is more than we were getting before. So
yeah,
we need it.
Cross pollinates. Yeah. And I can give it Hugo and all them it props for trying something new with Doom Eternal. Trying a new mechanic, because there's not any FPS out there quite like it. And it's these AAA companies that can afford to take a big risk and not have to fire all their staff.
It's like when you're getting into music and you have the older guy who knows all the really the really cool bands. So, like, I'm not a fan of like the radio rock metal stuff at all. In fact, it kind of makes me want to like stick a knife in my ears when I hear some of it.
Butt rock.
Well, like I'm thinking like when you sell something that's supposed to be like counterculture, but it's actually just totally homogenized, like Five Finger Death Punch, right? They're an insanely popular, very talented band. That sound is not for me. But if I meet a kid and he's like, yeah, I'm really into Five Finger Death Punch, like I'm not like, that band fucking sucks and you're lame, because that's whatever. All it does is create tension. But I'll be like, have you heard of Mastodon? Like that's what you want to do. You like kind of, that's your gateway, and then you introduce them into the harder drugs.
Yeah. And that's why I've always kind of felt with gaming itself. It's a cultural pathway that you find your way through, and so. A lot of people, like when they first seen Doom 64, they had it back on the N64. It kind of had to sit with them for a while for them to fully get it. They had to play around some games like Duke Nukem 64 would probably be more appealing right off the bat because of how wacky it is. You can flip all the switches, you can blow through walls. But then as time goes on, then you get used to the mechanics in Duke Nukem, then you could approach Doom 64, which is more of a stripped down, bare bones. You're here suffering, and you only get rocking music if you beat a level,
right?
Kind of approach. Yeah, and overall, it's been nice just seeing the influx into the community. Like there's like that, what it counts like Doom 4 for Doom, which has all of that Doom Eternal. Doom 2016 kind of, but in sprite form in old school Doom. So it's kind of mixing back and forth. And I'm a part of a project called Dead Tech, where it's hull infested tech bases, tech infested hell bases, and it has a lot of the bigger members of the Doom community on it. So it has people like Bridgeburner is going to make a map for it, Major Arlene.
His Twitch channel is amazing too.
Yes. He shows how you can be a mapper, create a good community, and keep things going. Like his Hellforge Discord is always off the rails, but in a good way, right?
He's a really, really amazing music too. Like he's got good. That's a guy that you should go to. Kids, if you like heavy music, go watch Bridgeburner's stream.
Yeah,
and just like ask him what are you listening to, bro? Because it's always good shit.
Yeah. You always have some pretty good metal going on. Yeah, and there's other people on there like Wolf McBear, Jark, Chester, Alper, Cato, Zargent, and there's more. And what it is, it's a community project where there's going to be a hub and you can choose your levels, kind of like Quake style, right? And the atmosphere is kind of like Doom 3, the dark, foreboding atmosphere, but has the Doom 64 sprites, sounds, and enemies. So it's kind of like this merger of realities where it's kind of like if Doom 3 had a more old school approach of Doom. And I've seen some of the maps for it, and I'm helping put together the Doom 64 assets and sounds for it. And I've been doing some sprite edits. So I've took photos of an object in my house, and I made an enemy in that game for that Dead Tech project. So there's going to be a custom sprite, me trying to just spend hours just getting it right. And
it's just a cat. It's a house cat.
So there's this project going on. You can find it on Doom World, and it's just amazing getting these mappers with a lot of experience letting me put my Doom 64 stuff in it. You know, they don't have to let me do that. They're Doom 1 and Doom 2 mappers. They don't have to let me put my Doom 64 stuff in there, but they let me, and they're happily using the Doom 64 sprites and stuff to make these amazing maps. And it's going to have it's going to be a for GZ Doom, so it'll have like the dynamic lighting that, you know, that Major Arlene and Bridgeburner used to make their maps look amazing. And hopefully it doesn't kill your computers.
I can't wait to see what they've been working on, because he's been working on that shit for quite a while now, and I've been like kind of privately messaging Bridgeburner like on Twitter or whatever. Like, hey, what is this thing you're working on? Like, because I mean, it's really I want to have like a million people on the podcast, but I have to like kind of select when is the time right.
Yes, and Bridge has also that Age of Hell that he's working on with it, which has Mr. Cat making all these fantastic 3D models, and I roast him every now and then. It's like, oh, that model looks like it would belong in Doom 64. He's
Yeah.
like, just stop talking about Doom 64 already. No, he doesn't say that, but yeah. And Age of Hell is going to be a free project. Bridge doesn't have to make it free, but it is going to be a free project, and it's going to have its own iWAD. So if you don't own Doom 2, you can still download Age of Hell and play it without having Doom 2.
Yeah. It's funny that he's giving it away for free, because I've been kind of preaching for a while now, like, you don't have to have the Doom iWAD for GZ Doom. So if you make a custom total conversion in GZ Doom, you can sell it. And I want people to make money if they need it, definitely. Or if that's just something they want to do. Because these kids got to eat, bro. Like, everybody's got to eat. But
yeah,
it's weird. It is weird and contentious and all that kind of shit. But I don't care. I want these people to continue to do what they do, and if they need to make money in order to do that, then I say go for it.
Like, there's a few people that are set up like Patreons and stuff that are related to the Doom community, and you'll get a few people that will react negatively to it. But if you see the topics, the vast majority of responses are positive, and we know like these people should be compensated for the hard work they do. I mean, they're young. A lot of them are young. A lot of them are starting out. A lot of them are just trying to live their dream of becoming a game developer. And anything you can do to push them that way, just go for it. Help them out. I already have a nice career, so I'm trying. So if I get any change, I'm putting it back into one of these indie projects, like Exophobia or like Carry On recently which became much more of a big release. And then Proteus, just putting back Kickstarter is backing that Kickstarter, even though I'm not sure how well my laptop can run it, just helping people out who want to live their dream of being an independent indie studio,
Speaking of Kickstarters, Stephen Kick, if you're hearing this, I want my fucking t-shirts, bro. I bought some really sweet looking System Shock t-shirts, and I don't know when they're supposed to come out.
I bet it's weird now with all the changes in shipping.
Yeah, well, I think it's like it's probably on me 100%. Like I probably didn't read the fine text. I probably had like a little too much to drink and spent a little too much money on some t-shirts, to be honest with you. But it's worth it because I really want to support everything Night Dive does.
Yes.
And I'm sure it says like t-shirts will be released, at this time or like when we reach this amount or whatever. And I don't know. I just want my t-shirts. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, they're a fantastic team, like the Night Dive, the new 3D Realms, and New Blood, and there's all these people that are coming up,
I got to get Sam on the show. Like I've been messaging, trying to see if I could make it happen. It's just not worked out yet, but he would be an amazing guest, I'm sure.
Yeah, I listened to him on Digital Foundry, and he's one of those types that he's a great interview. It's just a matter of getting him on because he's one of those guys that kind of sits back. He doesn't cause any trouble. He just wants to help out wherever he can. You see all these old projects, and you find his name on there. Because he's like a big name now, but he helps out wherever he can. And it's amazing.
He's done a great job of rising to the occasion. Like he's got his job now at Night Dive. He's doing amazing work, but he's brought the whole Doom community with him, which is fantastic. That's what I want to see. I just love his work, dude. Like the Kex engine is super impressive. The Turok re-releases are like wowie, and all this stuff that they're turning out over there, it's like unbelievable.
Yeah,
what Night Dive has been able to do.
Yeah, I recently played the Turok 2 multiplayer, and we were. It was like, oh, let's do a multiplayer game. Click on the game. Click on your friend. Oh, it works. Wait a second, this works like that, and it's an amazing port. It was never so easy to set up a multiplayer back in the day.
I really want a easily accessible build engine multiplayer port, like really bad. Because I was trying to help someone like desperately trying to port forward their shit to get In Blood working the other day, and it's just like fuck that. We live in 2020. We should not have to do this.
Yeah. Recently, for a different kind of multiplayer, I had to go through basically the ISP to say, open my ports, disable your so-called advanced security so I can set up a server for people to connect to,
Yeah.
And Night Dive shows like with the Turok engine that they can do it. just a matter of them getting enough time and funding to do such things. And it's kind of a bummer that they did all that work on Blood, and then Atari's like, nope, we don't have any more funding. You guys just have to sit on it now.
So do you want to hear about the thing that I've been hinting at?
Oh yeah. So you have some knowledge before I got knowledge, and this will come out before this episode gets to come out.
Yeah. So Realms Deep, I think I timed this pretty good. It's going to be like a week or maybe 2 weeks before Realms Deep.
So everyone else might have got to hear it, but this is the first time I get to hear it.
Well, it's good because I want to keep promoting it as the episodes go along. So Realms Deep 2020, people have probably already heard about it, but if this is your first time hearing about it, I'll explain it to you too. This has been the coolest project I think I've ever been involved in. Fred Schreiber over at 3D Realms, he's vice president there. He's been on the show before, and I guess he liked it. So they're putting on this digital convention, right? Realms Deep is going to involve 3D Realms, Night Dive, Apogee, New Blood, the whole retro shooter crew, essentially.
Nice.
And he's like, I need to do these interviews. Would you like to, have In the Keep podcast kind of like the feature interview on the show? So we're doing interviews. We've already done ones with, hopefully by the time this airs, I've done a few more, but like John St. John, we did Cliff Blazitsky from Unreal and, Gears of War and all that kind of shit. We've had Tim Willits on.
Oh man.
And Chuck Jones, who did all of the character design for like, Duke Nukem and for Counter-Strike and just everything. And it's been fucking amazing. Like, because you have the ability now, like I'm leveraging Fred basically, like put me in contact with these people I ordinarily wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to release all of these episodes in full on the podcast. So that week, people are just going to get nuked with like a whole bunch of really long, awesome interviews. I'll probably take that week off of the normal podcast. So we'll release it there. We'll release it on our YouTube channel. It'll also be on 3D Realms YouTube channel. And during the convention, we have like these really cool edited, shorter versions of the interviews, like 15 minutes or so. And just, with some really nice like gameplay overlays and lower thirds explaining what's going on, that kind of shit.
Man, that's pretty sweet, man.
But Jahar's over here, Scarecrow, everybody at 3D Realms, like Chris Holden has been around too. It's amazing. It's been sleepless nights though.
Yes. Well, to get all those names on there and just scheduling it, and I bet just talking through those guys, because those guys, like whenever I hear their interviews, they're always pretty cool dudes, but then they have so much to say, so it's a lot of work,
Cliffy B has a lot to say, man. Cliff Blazitsky is a cool dude, and as you talk to like AAA developers, I don't want to like shoot myself in the foot and end up in a bad situation later, but a lot of these guys seem very, out of touch, like with reality or with like what people want. Or the worst thing to me is I'm not criticizing anyone. It hurts my soul when I hear someone obviously curbing what they want to say or having to self-justify an opinion because, it has something to do with the situation they're in. And that sucks. Like, I want to hear people be totally open and honest. His interview specifically, and all of them are really cool, but he is such an open, honest, down-to-earth guy who really like respects the developers that have helped him get to where he is and that are currently working in the industry. It's amazing. And getting to hear like the minds like Tim Willits talking about level design for, hours on end.
Yeah. There's so many levels to it, right?
Yeah.
That just you can be mapping for years and years and years, and you're just climbing up these rungs, and just any tidbit helps,
I can cut this part out, but if everything goes according to plan in like maybe a couple hours, I'm going to be interviewing American McGee.
Oh,
so,
yeah,
that's going to be cool too. And we'll see how that turns out. Hopefully I'll have more to say about it by the time this episode airs, but yeah, dude.
I bet I bet so many people wish they were in your shoes to meet all these people and talk with them. I mean, out of the ones you mentioned, the only person I met was John St. John, and I got him to sign my Duke Nukem 64 cartridge. And my wife did her best Duke Nukem accent.
John St. John was really super cool too, just because he's a really entertaining person, and just having that whole conversation with him was like nonstop, just like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, this is so hilarious all the way through. And he was a radio broadcaster before he was in video games, and he used to live in my hometown and did a radio show on our local radio station.
Yeah, well, when I heard that doesn't surprise me, because when I heard John St. John and Iron Fury, I didn't realize it was him at first. And then I later discovered, like, whoa, that was John St. John. Man, he got some range on him.
Dr. Heskell. Yeah, no, he's got a crazy range. Like, he's not just, we talk about just voice acting in general and how some voice actors are just like, they just do their voice and that's it. And then there's these people who like him and like Mark Hamill, great example, who just can do a million voices, the man of 1,000 voices kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah, and that John St. John can get that little groveliness to his voice, which is hard. You don't hear a lot of voice actors pull that off, but John St. John, he has maybe the genetic gift to pull that kind of tone off, which makes a good Duke Nukem or Dr. Heskell.
The coolest thing about this, though, the interviews are amazing, and obviously, like, I love having the podcast. As you said, like, these are people that we're not all going to get the chance to talk to. So I'm just taking it as like, that's why a podcast exists. I'm trying to get these conversations available to people who could not otherwise have them, and ask the questions that, I want to hear. And hopefully that's the questions they would ask. But the best part about it is none of that. It's Fred gave me the opportunity to, like, I want to feature indie games in this, like, find the best, retro FPS or whatever video games that would fit into this kind of thing. Reach out to the developers. We're going to show trailers. And now in the internal Discord, it's like the greatest group of game developers all day long talking about, their different projects and the ways that they approach things and everything. And that has been such a gift, like having Sergeant Mark in there asking questions, and Scarecrow, he can't even talk about his game yet, but we'll see at the convention. And all of these amazing. Ozreek is there from Viscera Fest. I can't possibly name them all right now. It's just fucking crazy cool. And
I know you've mentioned some names that are working on an FPS, and I don't know if they've announced it yet or not. So by the time this podcast is released, so
yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, well, the nice thing is, like, for at least me, after the N64, there were some still remnants of these retro FPS. A little bit was like in Serious Sam and in Painkiller, but it actually felt like Dark Days, because first-person shooters was aiming for the biggest audience possible. So that's the military shooters were more palatable for everyone. But then these retro FPSs were just in a niche. And for us, it's like, oh, it's kind of like Dark Days. But I imagine for like a lot of these old school developers, it's like, man, either I'm going to have to make a military shooter or else I'm not going to have a job. So I'm hoping now that they see this kind of revival happening, and then that Realms 2020 is bringing all these people together, that they're like, oh, we can get this going again. There's an audience out here, and everyone's just waiting it, like it was around like when the Proteus Kickstarter happened, it was like a group of us. We would be in the Proteus server, but then we'd be in the 3D Realm server. We'll be in some of these smaller, like Hellscreen server, and it will be the same group. We're like addicts looking for our next fix, trying to get these FPS games.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad that they're noticing that there's an audience. Frederick Schreiber was talking about how there's an audience now, and hopefully it continues for them. I hope they continue to be encouraged to make games.
Well, it's when you get a bunch of really cool creative people together in any situation, like they become more powerful. And
yeah, they can collaborate and they solve problems much faster.
As I said before, anything you're doing, it's all about networking. And that seems to be, if I have one talent, it's that I'm pretty good at reaching out. I'm not afraid to reach out to people at the very least. Like,
Yeah,
because somebody asked me recently, how do you get all these guests? I'm like, I just drink a lot of beer, and I'm not afraid to, message someone at 2 a.m. in the morning or dig up their email or whatever it is, and just like ask. And if they don't respond, fuck it, whatever. Like, I don't lose anything from that. Like,
yeah. And I remember from like a podcast a while back, you were talking about the award shows and how about having like a personality or a community guy of the year. And a lot of people don't realize how vital having these community people on there, like someone to set up the Doom World forums and keep it going, like Dump Truck keeping the Quake mapping Discord going, because it creates a hub where people can synergize. And if you have a question of how to get through this programming hurdle, someone's likely to be there. Like when I created that Doom 64 Discord, we figured out how to put in custom music in Doom 64 EX 10 years later after it came out, just by creating a spot where people can connect, And so let me, if there's anyone out there that has a favorite game and they're sad it no longer is being talked about, make a Discord, make a forum on it. The worst that can happen is people stop talking about it. But if you're obsessed enough to keep talking about it, people eventually, you'll find like-minded people to keep it going.
I'm so like in love with the way that the community has grown directly because of what you said. And one of the things you were just talking about is how, there are so many people in the background doing things that people kind of, you don't realize or take for granted, or it just doesn't get talked about in the public eye enough. And like, you're a perfect example. Like, the show has a lot of straight up like game developers on it, but I've always wanted the Keep to be about the community. And so what I see is like, okay, when Realms Deep happens, I'm going to have like probably a YouTube video with God knows how much, of an interview with Cliffy B. And my absolute hope is that people like the channel, and then they hear an episode with you, because, or with Dump Truck, or with any of these people, JCR, maybe just an indie developer that's not quite famous or whatever. Like, I just want that to be a trickle down effect so that people grow to appreciate this kind of stuff. Your music has done so much for this community, and just in general, man, like, you're just a cool motherfucker. I would talk to you for 2-3 hours, period, no matter what. And I'd like to do it again. Let's go grab a beer whenever COVID fucking goes away.
Yeah, finally go back out west where I was born and raised.
And you've been not just a really cool person to like have in the Discord, but you've been like a loyal as hell listener. Like, I actually can't believe some of the times I'm like, oh man, he listens to all of these. And you always like are so generous with like giving feedback and like, this is what I think about that subject, and like engaging. And that's what is needed. Listening is great, and that's all I really want people to do. But when people engage with it, that allows the other people to also engage with it. And once you have a personal connection to something, it grows. That's how it works. Like, you have a personal connection to something, you care about it more than just on the base level. Like, if you want a podcast to grow, you want people to like, not just, oh, like I see that guest, I'm going to click on that. It's like, oh, I have a relationship now with the Motherlode, or Joe Rogan or whoever, and I want to support whatever that is, or I trust them to curate good content. So hopefully it works in that favor over time. This has been really fucking fun, man. I'm super glad we finally got you on the show, and I want you to be on again as often as you want to be. But closing thoughts, anything, shout outs you want to kind of give?
Yeah, I can talk forever. If anyone wants to find me, just Immorpher. I'm Immorpher64 on Twitter. I'm Immorpher on YouTube, Immorpher on Bandcamp. Those are the main places to find me. I hang around Doom World forums too. I'm on all kinds of crazy ass Discords, including the Keep. I appreciate all the hard work modders put in the community. If you ever want to use my work, just feel free to ask me. And the only reason why I ask people to ask is I like to see what you're doing. I like to promote good stuff. So, and I feel like if you're using my music, you must be a weirdo like me. So just share it with me, and I'll be happy to promote and help out any way I can.
We'll get a Scumhead his hookup real, like, as soon as I'm done with this, I'll probably message him and be like, use it, it's good, green light. Yeah. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah. And keep an eye out. I have Dead Tech is going to come out. There's I've been working on a Doom 64 sprite and sound replacement based on Evander's Doom 64 Retribution for Zandronum and whatnot. And there's the Quake Finish Mapper Jam 2. It's getting a sequel. So you mentioned you loved Smile Scythe map. All the same guys are returning, so you get to have another one of those. And yeah, just keep an eye out. A lot of good stuff is happening.
Much appreciated, brother. I'll see you again very soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. See ya.
Huge thank you once again to Immorpher for the amazing idea to have this episode and for finally, being on the podcast. It's been such a trip just getting to know him and everything. If you are enjoying this fucked up music that is going on behind my voice, I recommend you head on over right now to immorpher.bandcamp.com and buy all of his music. He's got like 6 albums on there, and they're amazing with beautiful artwork. Send them to your friends. Send them to your grandma. Whatever. Just enjoy it, man. He's done a lot for this community and for the Keep especially. Also, I want to say thank you to all of you out there listening. You know who you are. You're amazing people. The best thing you can do for this podcast is to listen to it, obviously, and tell other people that you listen to it. Spread the word. Go on social media. If you see it on Twitter, or if you just feel like saying, hey, I like this episode, reach out. Like, subscribe, review on like iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast. YouTube, doesn't matter. It's a huge help, truly. I want to say thank you to the people who support this podcast, and it's a ever-growing and ever-changing list, but gonna say thanks to Dots, Moose, Paul, Zach, Alexander, Brad, Night Owl, Tones, Jeffrey, Larissa, Nabe, Steve, Jazz Cash, Donkey, VJ, Tinjin, Haducant, Brand Flakes, Moleketro, Red Eyes Green Dragon, Anthony, Robert, Vince, Immorpher, Igrax Simon, Gelmo-san, Russell, and Void Inc. You are all greatly appreciated. If you're listening and you're like, how do I get a shout out on the show? Head on over to inthekeep.com, click on the support tab. You'll find links to all the different ways you can support. There's like a Venmo, there's a PayPal, there's even straight up credit card donations, or if you want to get something back for it, become a subscriber on our Patreon page. If you donate more than like $25 over time, doesn't have to be right now, but over time, we'll hook you up with a high quality In the Keep t-shirt on the house, kind of. But, we got to give back in some way, and we're trying to come up with other ways to kind of give back too. If you have ideas, let us know. Like, I can figure it out. Also, everyone who supports gets the episodes early, and if you donate in some other way, like if you go through the credit card shit and you give $25, like, yeah, just let me know. I'll hook you up with a t-shirt. It's just, you got to let me know. Join the Discord, be part of the community, follow us on all of our social medias and shit. It's all on the website, inthekeep.com. We also have merch there, too. If you don't already know about this, we have some really cool t-shirts available on Redbubble. We've got stickers. We've got, everything Redbubble does, we've got that. Go check that out. That's really cool. If you like this shit, you will also like Vince Steele on YouTube. You will like QuakeFans.net, RocketJump.zone, Multiplayer Doom Federation. Join their Discord, get involved in some events. Same with the US Quake community. Same with the Keep. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hanging out. And until next time, stay in the Keep.